Hello, welcome back to Why Your Life Really Matters, the pod book. I've been suggesting that everything is one process of becoming, and that at the very leading edge of that process are individuals like you and me coming into what I call a unividual communion. Recognizing that although we are individuals, through that individuality, we can come to recognize everything is also one. We are that formless oneness arising as this individual. And whilst normally we don't pay that any attention, when we do, it's extraordinary. And when we come into that oneness, it brings us into communion with what I've called the Supersoul. That individuals in communion are forming a greater system of which we as individuals are a part. And that's what in the past has been called God. It's the experience of, there's a greater intelligence. We are evolving intelligent systems. There's a greater intelligence which we are coming together to form, just as individual cells have come together to form the supercell system, which is me and other animals. So, is that for real? I think so. But obviously you need to answer that for yourself. And in the last chapter, I described how I've come to see the psyche as a sense, and that it's an everyday sense in which we Psysense our own system, but that also it accounts for our spiritual experiences, such as coming into communion with the oneness of being. You can't sense that, but you can Psysense it. So to check out whether there is indeed a greater intelligence, a super soul, a super psyche, whatever name you want to give that, you need, I suggest, to Psysense it and see what you think. Now, you may be someone who is very spiritually experienced, and what I'm offering to you, I hope, is a new way of understanding something you're already familiar with. But you may not be spiritually experienced. There may be an interest, or there may be even a skepticism, or both of which I understand. So my invitation in this chapter is to see what I mean by Psysensing the unividual communion, Psysensing the Supersoul. And if you're intrigued, try it for yourself. And in the next chapter, I'll lead a guided meditation in which you can follow my instruction and see what you experience. Now, I started near the beginning of this pod book to describe spiritual awakening, which I understand as coming into the unividual communion. I think that's what it is, as a very big experience for me and for many. And it really can be. I've described it as the wow, because it's wow. There's this enormous love because when you love someone, you feel so connected with them. Or when you feel so connected that you're communing with everything and everyone, the love is overwhelming. It's what the Christians call agape, or the Buddhists call metta. It's the big love, I've called it, because it's very big. And a benevolence, a universal benevolence, a wishing well to everything because you're connected with everything. It turns up all the other experiences because we're in a more emergent state. So there's pleasure, but it can be in the body. It's really beautiful feeling in the body, but it's also a kind of the word that gets used often is bliss, ananda in the Indian tradition. And a transfiguration is a phrase that's often used by the mystics. Everything becomes so beautiful. I certainly see that so much with people who come to the retreats that I've been running for whatever it is, 25, 30 years, that suddenly everyone becomes beautiful. A phrase that I often find myself saying is it's oceanic. And what does that mean? It just feels like all the boundaries are fluid, and there's a quality of permeance. Everything is permeable. So, how you'll describe it, or how you have if you know this experience, will be different to me. But one thing's for sure is that it feels more real. It doesn't feel like an illusion. It doesn't feel like... Now, that doesn't mean it's not. One has to be questioning. I really think we do. But after deep questioning for decades, the place I've arrived at is it feels more real because it's a more emergent level of reality that I'm experiencing at those times. But I also want to say this. I'm not walking around in that the whole time. I couldn't even function. I wouldn't be able to meet with my accountant if I was feeling the big love. I mean, too much. It's something which arises occasionally in the right place, in the right time. Mainly, it's a lot less dramatic. And in that way, it feels like, well, it's a bit like, loving my wife. I love her very much, but I'm not constantly walking around the whole time experiencing that ecstatic connection, which happens sometimes, and which made us fall in love in the first place. And it's like that with this communion. But as I'm familiar with it, more and more it's there. To begin with, it would come and go. When I was younger, it was more like, wow, and then nothing. And then wow, and then nothing. And what's happened over the decades has been that I found I can connect with it much easier, and I can also help other people connect with it, which is a delight. So I've seen huge numbers of people experience this in a big way, and in less dramatic ways, all over the world. From people who've come to my retreats to friends and acquaintances that I've spent time with. And my sense is, it is a bit like falling in love. You can't force the experience. You can't go, I want that big experience. But you can go on dates. You can be open to falling in love. And the only time you can really decide is falling in love for real or are people making it up is when it happens to you. And when it happens to you, I suggest you just go, yeah, that's real. That's really, really real. So I think of, for shorthand, this going into the individual communion as going up. It seems a good analogy. You come up into the most emergent state you can be in. And UP for me is individual processing. You change how you're processing the moment, and that leads to a different experience because what you're experiencing is the meeting of your processing and reality. So you shift your state. People talk a lot about shifting state. What is that? Well, it's how your psyche is processing. So if your psyche is processing in a very humdrum way, less emergent way, this is my experience, then life becomes that. I can easily step into a place where all of this more emergent spiritual stuff does feel miles away, is it? And I see that to begin with the big experience too. I've had it myself. I've seen it with others. You can have a big experience and then you come back to a less emergent form of processing, and it's like, did that even happen? Or people forget it's happened, and then they have it again and they remember, and then slowly it becomes established. So how we're processing is key. And what we're doing is we're trying to develop the passivity to process in a more emergent way more of the time. We're in a process of becoming. So becoming a individual for me is not something that just happens. It's a process of becoming. I'm an aspirant individual. I'm in the process of becoming more individual. That's one way of describing it. So I've emphasized the importance of your individuality. And I want to do that again now, because your experience will arise from how you process, and how you process will never be the same as anyone else. We're far too complex to be the same. There'll be similarities. So your experience will be individual. There'll be bits where you might go, oh yeah, I relate to what Tim's saying there, or I don't relate to that. And one should expect that. There's not a unividual one-size-fits-all experience to be had, and there's not one method to get there. There's endless methods, really, I think, that can help you change your state. Some people it's nature, some people it's dancing, some people it's music, some people it's ayahuasca. You find what's right for you and what's right for you now, because it may change. So I'm very much, I'm not attracted anymore to the thing I see a lot in spirituality, which is the experience you must have is the one that the teacher has, and the method is the one the teacher teaches. I think that's completely wrong. What I want to suggest to you is you will have your individual experience of coming into the individual communion, and experiment, see what works for you, and keep open, be creative. There's a lot of spirituality developed in the time when human beings were very collective. It's only relatively recently that we've become very individual. And in the collective mindset, it's very much do what's laid down. So spirituality is often authoritarian in that sense, or proscriptive. You should do this. Whereas I think the spirituality we need now to take us forward is creative. So I spend my time, a lot of time, in my practice, if that's even the right word. It's not really the right word. It's me exploring. I explore what happens if I do this with my attention. I explore what happens if I do that with my attention. I explore how I can change the way I ideate, and it affects my experience. And that's what I suggest to people who explore this with me. So, in the next chapter, there'll be a guided meditation, guided Psysensing. I'll say, have a look here, focus there, and you can do it, see what happens. It's just the beginning of a journey. You need to return to it, feel it out, see what happens. But in this chapter, I want to explore, what is that, a guided meditation? Or as I've called it, guided Psysensing. What is it exactly, and how does it work? And I want to share with you a simple 3-step process that I've been refining and sharing with the people who are traveling with me, and I'd like to give it to you. And the first step is focus. Now, I've explored already that it looks to me like consciousness is focused processing, high definition processing. That's what it is. And where you focus becomes vivid. And meditation, lots of meditations are to focus on something, and it becomes very, very, very vivid. So once you've got that, then you know, so the focus is what brings whatever it is I'm going to focus on into high definition. And then the next step is communion, which is to focus on the oneness of being, which is not something we normally do. I'll explain in a minute how we do all of this. And then the next step is, now you've come into communion and you're aware of the oneness, focus on the leading edge of the becoming, which is the supersoul, and you'll find that you're in communion with the supersoul. So you're focusing, you're communing, and then you're focusing on the supersoul. I've been exploring meditation in various forms since I was very young, teenager. And I've had some very intense periods of meditation, which have been very interesting. And one of the most basic meditations is to just focus on your breath. And I still do that. but I've found it not to be what I expected. When I was taught it to begin with, the message I was hearing was, focus on your breath. It is so boring, you will become enlightened. It hasn't been like that. What I found at a certain point in my early 20s with this was that if I focused intensely on my breath, breathing became ecstatic, became really pleasurable. And I've been doing this for so long that just bringing my attention to my breath now, it's just... Now, that's an interesting jump, which is a good start for meditation, which is before I was breathing, but I was processing it unconsciously. If I'd stopped breathing, I would have noticed. But I was just breathing, it's fine. Then I've taken my attention, I've focused on my breath, and then as I focus more and more, obviously I can't completely let go into it because I'm talking to you, but if I focus, do it with me. It starts to become rich, really rich. And if you can stay focused and go deep into it, that simple sensation of the air moving in and out of your body is very sensual, very, it's nice. That's a great shift to notice. And that will also move your state. I'm now processing in a different way. Now, because it's about focusing, this is why it's often traditional, and you can do this with your eyes open, of course, but if you close your eyes, like I think I probably did when I was talking to you and trying to do it, you become still. Why am I doing that? Well, because then I'm not processing looking, I'm not processing movement, I'm not processing sound, it's nice and quiet. And that helps me focus more and more on what I want to focus on, which is, in this case, my breath. And it starts to become more and more vivid. And then there's distractions. So when you notice a distraction, if there's a noise or you're uncomfortable, that takes your attention away and it becomes less vivid. That's it. And one of the great distractions that people make a big thing of is the thinking mind, talking to yourself. Look, I think thinking's really important. I think it is just talking to yourself. It's neither good nor bad. It's a wonderful thing that we can do it. But here, you don't want to be distracted by it, because this is not the time you've set aside if you're meditating or you're focusing on Psysensing. This is not the time you are reflecting. You do that another time. It's a bit like, to use the analogy I've used already with, being very close with my wife is not the time for me to be thinking philosophy. And when I do that, she doesn't like it, quite rightly. That's a different time. So the art here, I've come to think, is trust yourself. Develop the sense that if there's something really important that you need to be to attend to, if there's a distraction, if there's a noise that is really worrisome, or if you've remembered something you needed to do that really is important, it will come up. Otherwise, trust yourself to go, that will come back to me later. And the more that I found I can just trust myself, the quieter all of that becomes. And I mean, when I said I explore, I'm not suggesting you do this in this meditation, but there is a kind of a babble you can tune into, which is the lower levels of the processing system, where all sorts is going on. And it seems incoherent sometimes because it's just lots of stuff rising and falling. And you can tune into that, and that's quite interesting. That's the lower levels of the processing, I think. And I've found that fascinating to really go into that, but not for this. For this, it's just simple breath. Okay, right. So the first focus, make it vivid, choose your breath. There it is. Notice the distraction, bring yourself back. Oh, there, I see, I get it. When I get distracted, it's less. When I can hold it, ooh, it gets good. And then once you're in that, you're taking your attention, which is you like a torch, you've got it as a focused. And then like a torch where you flip the button and it becomes diffuse. And because it's not focused on anything in particular, it feels immediately, if I do it now, it feels very spacious. So you're now taking in everything, not anything in particular. Now you're always doing that, actually. When you focus on something, you're processing the background unconsciously. Because if something happens, if something happens on the edge of your peripheral vision, bang, you know it's there, or sound. So what's happening is you are doing a foreground background shift now. You're going, okay, what happens if I focus that intensity of processing, that HD processing, on the everything, on the all? And when you've made that shift, then you can Psysense the oneness. Now, how do you do that? Well, when I say focus on your breath and suggested you did it as we were talking, I'm suspecting you found it quite easy to do because you know what the word breath means and you know what it feels like when you just put your attention on your breath. When I say Psysense the oneness of being, you need to know what that means. And so what I'm doing is I'm offering you an ideational focus, a way of taking an idea and using that as the way of categorizing your experience such that you're able to Psysense the oneness. So in traditional meditation practices, you'll come across an image like everything is one ocean. There's one ocean and all the particulars are like waves. You're a wave on the ocean, I'm a wave on the ocean. That's what everything is. It's a lovely poetic image. I like the one that I tend to use now is one from physics. There's a field of being, and everything is information in that field. Everything is arising as differentiation within that field of being. And I call it the field of being because what is the one quality everything has that makes it one? It's just simply being. It's existing. I think everything has that quality. In other ways, what makes everything individual is they all have different qualities. It's the Zen, people talk about the isness or the thusness, depending on the translation. It's that. So you open out your attention and then you ideate it to be able to be aware not of anything particular, but the whole thing, and go, oh, it's all being, and I'm being, and the air is being, that breath is being, and the air and my body are the one arising in all these different forms. And as I do that now, it's a big shift. Now as an individual, I am embedded within this oneness. Oh, there we are. And the image which I get is, it's like tuning in to an old radio where you're like, oh, there it is for a moment, and then there it is, and then hold it. There it is. This enormous, expansive communion. And then you've focused, you've opened out to take in the one and to enter communion, and then to Psysense the super system, the super soul. And the phrase that I find helpful is that it's a sublime presence, because that's how I actually experience it, like a presence. And it's sublime. It's sublime. So again, if I said something simple to you like focus on the ceiling, you could look up, because you know what the word ceiling means and you know how to focus on it. And it's simpler, and it's similar with Psysensing. I want to say, okay, look up and find the leading edge of the forming. There's the ground beneath your feet. There's your body, which is alive as a biological system. There's the psyche. And then there is this sublime presence. And you can call it any name you like, really. I like the Sufi name where they call it the friend or the beloved. That's good. The Zen thing, the big mind. You just... there. Okay. So you're focused to see, what you focus on, you bring into HD, you process in HD, you open out, you take in everything, and there's a oneness of being, which everything is being, and you're being, and it's all one ocean of being, and it's arising as all this individuality, and you're embedded in the oneness as an individual. And then you raise your attention up, and it's like, all of that communion is leading to this communion of souls, this communion of psyches. And you can enter into that. And when you enter into it, that's when it's really extraordinary. You can just melt into it. That's when people say it's selfless, or you lose yourself, or you lose time. You don't. It's just you're not paying attention to those things. You're paying attention to something sublime. And you can just melt, as it were, or let your attention, I want to say, dissolve. I mean, none of that's happening. You're not dissolved. You're who you are. And yet there's what is happening is that you're communing with something greater, in which you... okay, running out of words for that. And if you become familiar with this, sometimes it's easier to focus on the emotional response, because that's an easier thing, because that's very tangible. So often for me, I focus in to my love for the beloved, because I have a strong love for the beloved now. And that can be a route into it. All right, so in the next chapter, I'm going to guide you through some of this, and you can see what happens for you, and you can reflect on it and try it out a few times. And if you want to go into it regularly with me, come and join me in my online community, the International Community of Unividuals, where we're all aspirant unividuals, and we're experiment with these different ways of psy-sensing and the experiences they lead to. And I'm astonished at how powerful it is online. Just amazes me. I wouldn't have thought it would be true, but it is. So people often ask me, is there a simple secret to all of this? And for me, the thing which I've boiled it down to is go up now. So I'm an aspirant individual, and when I notice I'm processing like this, I need to process like this. I need to enter the unividual processing. So I say to myself, go up now. And if I've developed the passivity, which increasingly I have, it becomes easier and easier to do that. To come out of what I'm in, where life can seem so humdrum or colourless, and to suddenly there's the colour. There's the beauty. Go up now. So the big experience I talked about, it very often happens spontaneously. A lot of people have had it at my retreats, of course, lots and lots. So in that way, they've come for the experience and they have it. But it is like falling in love. It really, happens when it happens. But it can happen to anyone. I really have come to that conclusion because I've seen it happen to so many people, all types of people. People who think it will never happen to them, and then it does. It may, if you've never had it happen, it may happen to you today. I've seen that. Just like, I've had people come knocking on my door, literally, having no idea what the experience was, and then the same day, the instance I'm thinking about was in the middle of the night. Tim, I've had it happen. That's how it is. It's like that. All right. So what have I said in this chapter? I've said we can learn to Psysense the Supersoul, and I've suggested we do that by going through. The practice can be, although it's, you need to find your own method, and what it'll be for you may not be this, maybe something else, but I want to share with you what I've got, because that's a way in, at least, which is focus. Oh, that makes it vivid. Expand your focus to take in the all, and then focus on what makes the all one, which is the field of being, the ocean of being, whatever metaphor works. And then come up, bring your attention up, as it were, into the sublime presence. Yep. And the way you're doing it, what's happening in a guided meditation, which is something people never ask. What is that? A guided meditation, I think, is simply being offered ways to focus ideationally to enable you to Psysense. And you need to find the thing that works for you. So when I mentioned the Supersoul, sublime presence works for me. I know how, a bit like you say ceiling, I can look. I say sublime presence, I know where to look. May not for you. Maybe like, I don't know what that means. You might find the beloved works for you. Or I try different things to offer a way. And then when you find it, it's like you tune in like the old radio, and then, now you know. And now you've got a route. That's it. So let's end. I just want to invite you to consider, have you experienced something like this? In which case, I hope that this new understanding may help you see it in a new way, and that that's of value to you. And if not, I invite you to ask yourself, are you open to it? Are you open to the possibility? And if you are, join me in the next chapter and we'll experiment. And then after that, we're back to philosophy, back to understanding what the hell this is. So the next chapter is a guided meditation. And if you're feeling ready for that, you can dive straight in. If not, come back to it later. You can move straight on to the next philosophy chapter and come back to it much later when you're ready. And also, if you feel it works for you, it's something you can return to and repeat. So there's no extra in the next chapter. There's no introduction. There's no outro. It's just the meditation. And then in the chapter following that, I'm going to explore what is the purpose of life.